Hello everyone and welcome back to another episode of Interview with an Author. Today I am super excited to be sharing with you guys another traditionally published Tuesday, this time featuring an author who is called Allen Steadham. If you don't know who Allen Steadham is, don't worry, I didn't know much about him either until he reached out to me asking if I had any availability in my author interview project, and of course I did. So I was absolutely ecstatic to write him back and say I'd love to get to know more about him and potentially use my platform to share his story and his writing process. He is an author of speculative Christian fiction, which is anything from superhero thriller Christian fiction to science fiction and fantasy. So if those are the kinds of things you write or things you're interested in, then be sure you stay around for the rest of this video because it's going to be chock full of knowledge and information. One of the things that I love about this author interview project is how it's actually reaching so many people all over the place. People are hearing about this project, maybe from a friend, and they're asking if they can participate and contacting me to see if I have availability. I have also been reaching out to some authors that I already know and love, and some of you guys who've even found me through social media have asked and reached out if you could participate as well, and I love how this is really bringing together the Christian fiction community. But enough about the project itself, let's get into the interview. Hello, Allen, and thank you so much for coming on to Traditionally Published Tuesdays. Why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself and tell us all a little bit about what you write?
Hi, this is Allen Steadham, and I am the author of Mindfire, Jordan's World, and coming next month, Jordan's Arrow. And I write in Christian speculative fiction. Basically, speculative fiction covers a lot of ground. His Mindfire is a superhero thriller novel, but the Jordan of Algeron series, which includes Jordan's World and Jordan's Arrow, and a third book, Jordan's Deliverance, is all Christian science fantasy. So let me tell you a little bit about myself. I am from Central Texas. I am married. I have 2 sons and a daughter, and I am new to the traditionally published world, just signing a contract with Ambassador International last year, or actually the year before. Yeah. Anyway, 2018 is when I signed with Ambassador International, and I am delighted to do this interview for Traditional Tuesdays, and very grateful for the opportunity. So let's move on to the questions.
So what made you choose to write Christian fiction and science fantasy / speculative fiction specifically?
That's a great question. I originally was planning to write fantasy, Christian fantasy, but when I wrote the Jordan's World, the first book in the series, I got about halfway into it and realized, there's some science fiction going on here too, because it takes place on an alien world. Aliens abduct Jordan and her mother from Earth and take them to this Earth-like world. And so I looked it up, and technically it met the definition of science fantasy. So I knew it was going to be a trilogy, and so that just really appealed to me. I'm a science fiction geek, specifically a Star Trek geek, although I like Star Wars, Babylon 5, Battlestar Galactica, a number of them. But Star Trek is my jam.
Can you describe your publishing journey and kind of tell us how you went about querying, submission, getting an agent if that's applicable, and all of those things that kind of lead up to the traditional publishing experience?
Okay, I don't have an agent. Oh my goodness, did I try querying? I did not start off traditionally published. In 2016, I self-published Mindfire on Amazon, and after I did that, I started querying and querying and querying, as many people experience, getting dozens of rejection letters because it's a really, really busy industry. So what ended up happening was that I learned about a Twitter pitch event called #FaithPitch. And so I decided, since I had just finished up Jordan's World, I decided to go ahead and do a 280 character tweet pitch for that. And so to give you a real quick aside about Faith Pitch, essentially Little Lamb Books, a small Christian traditional publisher, sponsors the event every year, 3 times a year. And it's designed to get agents and editors, representatives from the publishers to be able to have direct contact with Christian authors. And so if those agents or editors see something that they can like it, and they can give instructions on how they want the Christian author to proceed and get their manuscript to that publisher. So that's what happened. I put in a tweet for Jordan's World, and I got a response to it that day, actually within about an hour, from an editor from Ambassador International. And she told me where the website was for the publisher and how to go about putting in my my query letter and submit the document. It was a Word document. And I got word back within 2 days from the publisher himself. And that just shocked me, because I wasn't used to that kind of turnaround. I was expecting maybe a week, maybe 2 weeks, maybe never. But no, he got back to me in 2 days, emailed me directly, said that he got the point of Jordan's World and he really liked it, and he offered me a contract on it. At which point I got on the phone and called him, because I wasn't sure whether it was a scam or not. And I talked to him, and he was great. He answered all of my questions. And so my wife and I looked over the initial contract. We were very pleased with it, discussed it with our pastor, and he gave the okay on it. And so we signed. And so from there went through the process of giving the publisher more information about the book, and went through edits, and actually even a week later I decided to pitch Mindfire directly to the publisher, and he got back to me in 1 day, speed reader, and offered me a contract on Mindfire. Mindfire ended up being my debut book. Jordan's World was the next book. But yeah, I learned about professional edits. I have a journalism background, and so I was able to do some pretty decent editing, and my wife helps me to edit. But even all that, we're not professionals. We weren't professionals when we started out at this, certainly not from the editing side. And so we decided, to really pay attention to what my editor, Daphne, had to say. And she had some really good suggestions, and I learned a lot about point of view from her. And so anyway, we got through the whole editing process on everything. And so Mindfire came out first, actually on Good Friday last year, 2019, April 19th. And then on July 1st, Jordan's World was released. And now in February 7th of this year, Jordan's Arrow will be released. So it's been a journey. It's been a real journey. Gotten a lot better at editing, gotten a lot better at point of view, and a lot of things.
Why did you choose the traditional publishing route?
I would say that the best answer to that is that I just took a chance. I had been okay with self-publishing, but it can be really difficult because you were doing everything. And so even though I was getting some responses and some sales and things like that, the marketing is really a challenge when you're doing everything by yourself. And so when there was an opportunity through Faith Pitch to possibly get signed with a traditional publisher, I went for it. I prayed about it, talked to my wife about it, and just earnestly sought out the Lord about it and asked Him to bless. And that's exactly what happened. So, you could say I chose in that I went for it, but I would say just the Lord blessed that to happen.
How long did it take you to write your most recently published book from start to finish, and how did that compare to some of the earlier books that you've written?
How did that compare to your first book? Okay. Um, so Mindfire was my first book, and I wrote the first draft of that during the month of November 2013 for National Novel Writing Month. And so between that and when I self-published it was basically 2.5 years. Um, and then it had to go through probably about another 3 to 6 months worth of editing before it could go. Anyway, long story short, it was 6 years between the point of when I started Mindfire, my first book, and when it was published. In contrast, I started Jordan's World in 2015, and I originally started Jordan's World on Wattpad, and it was going to be a serialized story, just with like 1,000 to 1,500 words per chapter, and I was going to put it out there and get feedback. Nothing against Wattpad, but Wattpad and I didn't get along very well. It was a great deal of competition, and the types of stories that got lots of responses from people weren't really the stories that I was interested in writing. So I went ahead and pulled Jordan's World off of Wattpad and went more to a traditional style of writing for it, full chapters, full story, and built from there, which was kind of a challenge because I'd already written about 21 chapters into it, but I got to flesh those out. I got to make more and add more to it. And then when it went through the editing process, there was even more to it, and it got deeper and everything. And like I said, my wife was with me every step of the way on that, helping me with it. And so she's my first editor. She's the person that I collaborate with, that I bounce ideas off of, and she's my #1 fan. So, but anyway, it took basically 4 years. I started in September 2015 and it was published on July 1st, 2019. So 4 years. So cut down the process by about 2 years. The actual, if it had been a normal process, if I had started from scratch normally, it probably would have taken about a year.
What is one aspect of the traditional publishing industry that might have caught you by surprise or that you found surprising your first time working with a traditional publisher?
I would say probably the most surprising thing was how quickly um, I got to know and became not just comfortable with, but developed a family-like relationship with my publisher and the authors at Ambassador International, and the staff as well. It's a really close-knit family, and we communicate all the time. And so, I knew that there would be a close relationship between, say, me and my editor, but I mean, I can email or call the publisher himself whenever I want. I don't do it that often, but for the important things, I definitely do, and I feel comfortable doing that. Same thing with other authors or anything. We've supported each other's book launches. We've supported each other during live Facebook events and stuff, and so that was surprising. That was an aspect that I did not expect, but I'm very grateful for.
What would you say is the hardest part of the traditional publishing experience? And what might you say actually turned out to be one of the most rewarding parts of being a traditionally published author?
What is the hardest part of the traditional publishing experience? Coffee. No. I would say the hardest part is actually being patient. Um, it takes a good bit of time between even the time that you finish, your what you hand in as the manuscript. That takes a certain amount of time. That can take anywhere from 6 months to a year plus. But after you do that, then you go through the editing process. Then you go through working with the design team to come up with the cover, to come up with the back text, the back cover blurb, and you know, there's a lot of things that happen before the book actually comes out, and then you get the release date, and you've got to do a lot of marketing before the book comes out so you can build up an audience and interest in it before it comes out. So I would say that you can be just raring to go about your book coming out, but it's not going to come out till the release date. And even when the release date happens, you'll have the ebook copies, for example, the Kindle or the Nook or the whatever. Those will be available immediately, but it might take a little longer for the print books to be available. And so you exercise some patience, and it gets rewarded because within a couple of days of it, up to a week, everything's in full swing and your book is out, and then you can really go into another stage of marketing about it. What is the most rewarding part of the traditional publishing experience? I would say probably the fact that you can say that your book was traditionally published, that it is available in stores, it is available through Amazon, through Barnes and Noble, that it is an actual book that people can hold in their hands, and it's got your publisher's brand on it, and your publisher works with you and gets the word out there and is proud of you, and really helps to enrich that experience of being an author. It's sort of like some validation for your work. You can have that validation if you self-publish, but it's not the same. It's basically you and you alone know all the hard work that you did. Maybe your closest friends or family know. When you're with a traditional publisher, that whole team, however big the publisher is, it could be just a little, one office room, but you've got everybody that's there is backing up what you're doing, or it could be, mid-level or whatever level, but it's a shared experience, and that's very rewarding.
What advice would you give to aspiring writers hoping to be traditionally published?
Well, I would say the first thing is be prepared to go outside of your comfort zone pretty much every day, because that's what it takes. You have to go outside your comfort zone to pitch your book online, whether it's through a Twitter event, a pitch event, or sending out query letters to agents. Anything you do, you have to believe in yourself first. You have to believe in your work, because if you don't believe in your work, no one else will. There's no reason for them to. So you have to believe in your work first, and you have to put it out there with confidence and say, this is great stuff. This is why you should care. Let me tell you about this. Let me tell you about that. And it's not easy. It's not easy, because most of us are just, average Joes or Janes, and we are used to going about our life, and we're, creative people first, and creative people are not always the most social people. But to get traditionally published, to get out there, and even if you self-publish, you are your main voice. You are your main marketing source for your work. And so you got to believe in it. You got to push it. And that means you got to go outside your comfort zone. It's just, once you start doing it, it will become second nature. The other thing is that You can't just wait until the book comes out and then start promoting it. It's a process. Basically, okay, honestly, for traditional publishing or even self-publishing, marketing never stops. You basically have to build a brand for your book or for you, really, as an author. And basically, hey, I'm different. Pay attention to me. This is what's going on. This is the point. You need to get my stuff because, and it gets easier. The first few attempts, I'll give you an example. I created my website. It took me 2 years to get to the point where I really feel happy about where my website is. And a website, a domain name, whether it's your name, your pen name, whatever, these are things that you have to do and set up in order to basically have a platform to tell people about what you're doing so that they will they'll know who you are, first of all. Getting out there, building a social media presence, whether it's on Facebook, whether it's on Twitter, whether it's on Instagram, Pinterest, whatever interests you, whatever you feel strongest at, or whatever you need to develop to get the word out about your stuff, that's what you need to do. Whatever, you'll be surprised at what you excel in when it comes to your work. But the first and most important thing is you've got to believe in it, and you've got to believe in yourself.
What advice would you have given to yourself when you were just starting out hoping to be published, or perhaps even all the way back when you first began writing?
When I first started writing at age 10, I probably wouldn't have taken too much advice at that time. A lot of what I just said, I would have told myself because it would have saved me some trouble. Just when you go from being writer to author with hopes of being published, there's a change that happens. Because if you're a writer and you don't care about getting it out there, you're just writing because you enjoy it, and there's nothing wrong with that. But when you decide, I want to be an author, whether that's going to be on the side or as your main career, it changes because you have to approach it differently. You have to do all those things that I was just saying about marketing and believing in yourself and stepping outside your comfort zone, because that's all part of being an author now. You literally have maybe 5 to 10 seconds, and that might be being generous, to get people's attention. So you have to be constant. You have to be fervent, but at the same time, for crying out loud, don't be rude. I've seen all kinds of mistakes that people have made because all they do is that they don't add a personal presence. And that's something I should have added before. When I put stuff out for social media, when I put stuff out regarding my work, it is to also show personality, whether it's in the professionalism of a book trailer or showing that something's on sale right now, but also you've got to get out and interact with people, which I know is difficult for some people. And so, like, if you're on social media, interact with people. When you set up a website, make it so you can interact with people. People want to communicate. They'll give you feedback, whether it's positive or negative. But you can't be unapproachable. It's just the opposite. You need to be approachable. So I would have told my younger self that. Not that I was like aloof or something, but just get out there and be available. At least make it so that if someone sends you email, respond in a timely manner to them, or if they leave a comment, respond the same day at least. And that shows people that you care about their interactions, and they'll want to interact with you more. There's just so much to this.
So you've talked about these books on and off throughout this interview, but where did the ideas and the inspiration come from for your books Mindfire and the Jordan's World series?
When I started out writing as a kid, at 10 years old, I started making comic books. And I did that for a very long time, even into adulthood. I wrote a superhero team called the Armen. And over the course of 20 years, this built from, a kid's dream and kind of, I guess you could say kind of archetypes of existing characters. That it wasn't Superman, it wasn't Iron Man, but they had some pretty strong similarities, just different powers, different backgrounds and stuff. But eventually it built into a generational comic book. And so, and then when I became a Christian, I decided that I wanted one of the characters to give their lives to Christ. And so I had written a story, a comic in 1985 that had one of the characters go through a life-changing experience, but it wasn't to be a Christian. I didn't get saved until 1996. But in 1996, after I got saved, I took that same storyline and rewrote it so that character went through a crossroads and found that their solution, their salvation to that situation was to give their life to Christ. So fast forward to 2013, I decided that I wanted to participate in National Novel Writing Month, and I wanted, but before I could do that, before I could write a full novel, the Lord showed me that I needed to hand over everything of myself to Him, to give my creativity wholly over to Him, and then He would bless. And so I prayed for that and I asked for that, and I did. I handed it all over to Him. And then the Lord blessed, and I was able to write a 50,000 plus word first draft in 3 weeks. And so I had taken elements from the comics, elements from that 1996 comic story, but I modernized it and I deepened it and added some new characters and revised some existing character stories. But basically, Mindfire is those characters from my childhood, those comic story elements, but built purely into a redemption story around the main character, Leah Hamilton, who is the daughter of, her father used to be a superhero. Her stepmother used to be a superhero. Her biological mother is still a supervillain. So it allowed some contrast in there, but the whole point of Mindfire is that it's a redemption story. It's about second chances and forgiveness and showing that, everybody has that chance at redemption, no matter what they've done. And so, and actually the tagline of the story is power alone does not make a hero or villain. And that's true for everybody, Power can mean a lot of things. In this case, it was literally superpowers. But, there are non-powered characters in the story, and it's not your typical, capes and bad guys or bad girls trying to take over the world. It's a lot more personalized story. Mindfire was the superhero name that I originally gave to Leia back in the comics, but she doesn't actually ever use that superhero name, but it's a great book title. So there's that. And so that's what led to that, basically a 30-year history of comics and characters I knew like they're my own family. I had a chance to take them and kind of give them their final story, and at the same time point towards Christ, point towards God, and show it doesn't matter who you are, and it doesn't matter what your capabilities are. We all need Christ. We all need salvation. We can't make it on our own. We can try. We'll get there for a little while. We may have some successes along the way, but ultimately, we all need Christ. Now, Jordan's World, that's different. And more coffee. Jordan's World, I had to create a world from scratch, literally. Wanted it to be brand new story, brand new characters, nothing I'd ever done in comics, nothing like that. And so I started with a simple idea. The main character, Jordan Lewis, gets abducted by aliens and taken to another world. That's literally the only idea I had to start off with. From there, it built, and I included her mother, Janice, was taken with her. And we don't know the aliens that, there's a mystery regarding the aliens that take them. And they don't take them in a spaceship. I didn't want to do, sort of the trope of the aliens take the spaceship where they poke and prod and do strange things and send them back to Earth. No, this was different. I wanted to do things differently for this. So I had Jordan and her mother were taken to another world through basically a technology that's sort of like Stargate without the big Stargate, just opening a portal of light, stepping through, and after a really weird transition, you end up on basically the other side of the galaxy. And and this is an Earth-like world, but it's not, there's a lot of differences. I mean, there's air to breathe, there's water to drink, there's animal life, there's humanoids. But for the most part, the world is bereft of the technology that we take for granted here on Earth. I wanted that contrast, but ironically, the aliens that brought them there have some pretty advanced technology, but they kind of stay to themselves, and and it's a colder world, much colder than Earth. Not, I mean, you can survive it, but it's much colder. It'd be like if you were used to, like I'm here in Texas, and it gets pretty hot here in Texas, and even the winters are pretty mild compared to other parts of the country. But say if you went from that to say your average day in the Arctic or Antarctica, and then colder than that, then you would be on Algorand, which is the world that Jordan and her mother end up on. And so with Jordan's World, two things I wanted to bring out about it. One was intentional, and the other just kind of happened. The intentional thing was that the theme of Jordan's World is that God reigns over the whole universe. There's nowhere that God can't go. There's nowhere he can't reach you and help you. And so the other theme was adoption. And I didn't start out for that, but it ended up happening because this tribe of people from this world, Algorand, they take in Jordan and her mother and basically make them part of the tribe. They teach them their language, they teach them their culture, they find roles for them, they help them out. And so that helps them to, acclimate as best possible to Algorand. At the same time, Jordan is 17 when she's abducted and marooned on this other world. Now, it's good that they took her mother, but at the same time, Jordan hadn't even figured out what she wanted to do with her life. She was 17. And so we start off the story in chapter 1, 4 years after they have been dumped on this world and taken in by this tribe. And Jordan is, she's kind of got one foot in this world and one foot still back on Earth. and she doesn't know, what she wants to do with her life. And that's a lot of what Jordan's world is about. However, Jordan also finds out that the aliens that brought them there might be on the other side of the planet. So they start off on kind of a quest. She and three of her fellow hunters, because that's the role that she ends up. The young people in the tribe basically are sent out to get food for the tribe, meat for the tribe, and so she and three of the hunters from her pack go and set out to cross the world and to try and find these aliens that brought them. And at the very least, Jordan wants to get answers, but she kind of harbors the hope that maybe if they brought them there, that they can send them home too. And so the real question of this book becomes, which world is Jordan's world? And, what does she want to do with her life? And how does God figure into the whole thing? And so it makes for a very interesting story, because along the way, basically Jordan has to make a choice, and God is involved in that choice. Now, Jordan is not a Christian. Nobody in the first book is a Christian, but that's okay, because it gives all the glory to God, and it gives all the glory to what he can do. I wanted to keep it simple in the first book, but it is part of a trilogy, and there's a very definite cliffhanger at the end. I wanted to do that. I love cliffhangers. Even Mindfire has a cliffhanger. I love cliffhangers, but I don't like cliche cliffhangers. It's got to tie into the story. It can't just be tagged on. It's got to make sense.
So you've recently been working on Jordan's Arrow, which is the sequel to Jordan's World. How has your writing process been different when you've been writing sequels and writing book 2, as opposed to when you were writing book 1? How have things kind of changed and progressed?
Another good question. Okay, so with Jordan's Arrow, actually it's kind of funny. I started off with one idea about how to do things, but one of the beautiful things about collaborating with my wife is that she will look at my initial ideas, and she'll kind of be a sounding board for me. And so some of the ideas were good, some of the ideas were solid, but some of them really needed some refining, particularly regarding one of the characters named Erica, who's a friend of Jordan. But one thing that was hugely different than I expected, I did not expect this, but by the third or fourth chapter of the book, it became very evident to me that Jordan's Arrow is a war book. And that's a really interesting situation to be in as a Christian author, because I'm not pro-war, but at the same time, it's a great storytelling medium, because essentially any book has conflict, whether it's physical conflict or emotional conflict or just circumstances. There's got to be something to drive the story. And in this case, Jordan's journey continues as she takes on a leadership role in the tribe. And as a result of that, she's got to make life or death decisions in order to keep her tribe safe. And again, God comes into the picture, because, again, Jordan's not a Christian yet, but she's on her journey, she's on her way, and she knows about God. And so is she going to, follow the path that God has set out for her, the advice, if you will, or is she going to, lean on other people, other leaders in the tribe, to make her decisions? And she's grown up. In the second book, she's a few years older, and she's in a different position, and it was really fascinating. And one of the things that I think is really important in Jordan's Arrow is to show consequences for decisions. There's good consequences and there's bad consequences. And those kind of go up the scale as you take on more of a leadership role, because if you become responsible for a lot of people, your decisions affect those people. And when you're talking about war, it's not just your people anymore, it's your side and their side, and the decisions that you make can affect a whole world. And so it's really something. And as a result of those choices and those consequences and the things that happen along the way, it puts Jordan in a different place. And then we lead up to the events in the third book.
Was Jordan's story a planned series all along, or did book 2 surprise you in any way? In what ways has the story changed without giving away any spoilers?
I always planned on it being a trilogy. I didn't know exactly where it was going to end up. I worked on it book by book, but I had a loose idea of where I wanted to go. And so I've told you about Jordan's World. I've told you about Jordan's Arrow. So, I mean, book 2, again, the only way that it surprised me is that it ended up being a war book. And I was really grateful for the way that the Lord gave it to me, because it doesn't praise war, but it shows war. It shows how there really aren't any winners in war, despite people's intentions, despite what people are fighting for. There's always a cost on both sides. And then the third book, Jordan's Deliverance, that one I really can't say too much about, except that some more time passes. There is a cliffhanger at the end of book 2. And that leads into the final book. And I felt a huge responsibility. Jordan's Deliverance is already written. It's in the editing process right now. But I felt a lot of responsibility to make it a satisfying conclusion for the readers, and at the same time without compromising the story, without compromising the elements, without compromising the Christian stance in the story. All of that is important. I feel that the Lord blessed in that regard. I feel like that the series of 3 books is a completed story. And I hope that readers love reading it as much as I enjoyed writing it and going over it.
Your books are described as action-packed and intense, so what tips do you have for writers for keeping the momentum going in a story? How do you write intense or action-packed scenes and sequences?
Coffee. A lot of that has to do with seeing the scene in your mind, and all writers do to an extent. Different people have different approaches. To me, what makes for an action-packed or an intense scene is the emotion you put into the scene. You've got to feel it when you write it, and I'm a pretty intense person. You might not know that by the way I've been giving this interview, but I am. I feel things extremely deeply, and plus I grew up reading superhero comics, so there's a lot of action in superhero comics. But I also grew up reading X-Men during the 80s, and those were intense, very intense. And I've always enjoyed movies that were really intense, that had a lot of emotional impact, that made you feel. There's a very, very fine line between projecting what you feel and being manipulative as a writer. And I don't like being manipulative as a writer. I want everything to feel natural. Um, so, when I write, I see the scene in my mind, and there's there's a lot of action, particularly in the second book, in Jordan's Arrow. There's a lot of action in certain parts of Mindfire. There are lots of action. Even in the other two Jordan books, there are action scenes, and so when I write it, I see it, I feel it. Um, I want it to kind of jump out of the book at you, to pull you in and make you a part of that scene. And, uh, if you can feel what I felt when I was writing it, then I've done my job right. If you cannot put the book down, if you've got to turn to that next page, then I did my job. Um, and so with the action packed, it's got to be a natural progression. It can't be forced or prolonged. You shouldn't get tired of the action scene. I've seen some fantasy movies that shall remain nameless where the action just went on and on and on and on, and you never get a chance to breathe, and you never get a chance to think, basically, because all the action is going on. It shouldn't be like that. It needs to serve a purpose and be done. And same thing with the intensity. Intensity should not be held out. Otherwise, you are overusing it as a writer. And so it needs to hit you. It needs to pull you in, make you feel what they feel, and then release you. So you can absorb it, you can feel it. And so that's how I write those kind of scenes.
You also have an interest in comics and webcomics, which I think is really cool and unique. So, how is writing comics different from writing novels? And where did that interest come from and progress into novel writing and all of that kind of thing?
I started reading comics at age 8. Started off with DC, with Batman, and then went on to Marvel and Spider-Man, Avengers, X-Men. Really liked X-Men. Totally did the emo thing during my teens. Um, and so, but at the age of 10, I'd started off just tracing comics, but then I I had a funny thing happen at school. I was actually critiquing some comics, and one of the other kids said, "Well, if you don't like it, why don't you just write your own?" I said, "That's a good idea." So I started. I just wrote like this little 10-page comic on notebook paper and hand drawn with pencil and hand lettered and all that stuff. But I kept at it. Like anything, it's not going to be very good at first. No one starts off a great writer. No one starts off a great comic creator. You just learn as you go. But another funny story, even at the age of 10, I did have the confidence thing down because I I sent a 20-page comic submission to Marvel Comics. It was awful. I don't have it anymore, but believe me, it was awful. But I got the sweetest rejection letter I've ever gotten in my life from one of the head editors at Marvel at that time that basically just encouraged me, keep going. And so I did. I was very, very flattered by that, and I kept going. And then I got into middle school and was still doing the comics. And a person that I cared about deeply looked at my comics and said probably what others had seen but were too nice or afraid to say, you really should get better at drawing. Which crushed my little heart, but at the same time, I didn't let that stop me from doing comics. It actually made me want to do better, and so I kept at it. And then I started working on the stories more, and like I say, it developed into a generational superhero comic. And But and then by the time I got to the webcomics age, I started putting some of those superhero comics on the web back in 1995 and 1996. But then after I got saved, I realized, probably not a good idea to keep doing these superhero battles and stuff like that. So I ended the Armin series, and my wife and I told her I wanted to do a Christian webcomic with her. And so we started working on what would become Due East. And Due East, I came up with the idea in 1999, but we didn't actually start doing art on it until 2003. And it didn't really take off until 2007. Now, the difference is we got to the point that we were scripting each page. So I would put them out, once or twice a week on what's now the Duck webcomics. And I basically at the point I was still doing the penciling, and I was still doing hand lettering at first. But as we progressed along into 2008, I got to the point of computer lettering and started doing some inking and coloring and stuff like that. But we got better at the scripting, and so that allowed us to plan out and do a better job at dialogue, kind of keep each page flowing to the next, and the Lord blessed. We had asked the Lord to give us the story for it, and He did. And so, but then came along, and by the time we got to November 2013, with National Novel Writing Month, it was a huge difference between writing out scripts and actually writing the page, because in comics, you can draw the expressions, you can draw the actions, you can draw the scenery, and so all you have to focus on is the dialogue and basically what happens on the page. Novels, you have to write the scenery, you have to write the expressions, you have to write the way they respond, the characters respond. You have to write what kind of character they are. And so it's a different mindset. It's a different you have to grow into it. And if you've been doing comic writing for as many years as I did, and you start doing novels, it feels strange at first, because you are still seeing the scene in your brain first. But you're no longer drawing, you're typing. And so you have to get better at choosing words. I use thesaurus.com a lot. It's a great tool because you don't want to use the same descriptive phrases over and over, and you may need to describe, say a box, but you don't want to say box 5 times in a paragraph. It's boring and people get tired of seeing it. You have to find new ways to phrase things to make your point, and that grows you as a writer. And so that was huge. You have to get used to flow. You have to write things in such a way that when I wrote comics, I was always on the edge of my seat to draw the thing, because I knew where I wanted it to go, but I would still want to get it there. And sometimes that made for rushed comics, sometimes that made for rushed art, sometimes that made for rushed story, which is not good. You don't want anything to feel rushed. So you learn pacing when you're writing novels. You learn pacing, and you learn because if your pace is too slow, eyes will glaze over. They will close the book. They'll say, "Okay, I'll come back in a year and look at this or something. Um, you don't want that because they might not ever come back. If it's too fast, it's frustrating because people can't figure out what's going on. Um, Also, if it's too fast, your book may be shorter than you intended. You may leave out details. It won't be satisfying because the reader will feel rushed, and they will feel like what just happened, and you don't want that. So I learned pacing in novel writing. I learned descriptive phrase. Um, I learned how to make more satisfying moments between characters. I've learned how to space out dialogue. I used to be a dialogue machine, and you can't do that in novels. People will be unhappy just reading pages and pages of dialogue with no descriptive phrasing in between. So that's something I learned. Um, it's quite a transition, but basically by the time that I got through Jordan's World, I felt a lot more comfortable. When I was working on Jordan's Arrow, I really felt at home writing novels. Um, so yeah, that's where all that came from.
What book or books are you working on next? Do you have any upcoming releases or future plans or anything else you'd like to share with us?
Coffee. Okay, so I've already mentioned the third book in the Jordan series, Jordan's Deliverance, and so that will come out either later in 2020 or early in 2021. I don't know. I don't have a release date on it yet. I have begun working on a Christian steampunk trilogy. And what I can say about it for now, in the first book, the main character is a biracial female whose parents are black and white. And it takes place on an alternate Earth in the present day. Yet, because it's an alternate Earth, it has some very interesting carryovers from the Victorian era, both in traditions, customs, and technology. So that's pretty interesting, and definitely planned it, as a trilogy. And I don't want to say too much about it. I've actually gone through a draft of it and doing some rewrites on it right now. And you might wonder, why steampunk? Well, because I'd never done it before. And there's a lot of different ways to write steampunk. I wanted to find a way to make this mine, to kind of put my unique stamp on steampunk, and so that's why it's in the present day, because a lot of them are in the past or they're on another world where things develop steampunky. I wanted to be able to make some parallels. I like doing parallels, and one thing that you'll find with my books is that I also like making little strange, cute parody type pop culture references here and there, and that's a lot easier to do on a present day Earth, even if it's an alternate Earth. And then beyond that, there are all kinds of possibilities. I will keep writing as long as the Lord gives me stories. So I appreciate the opportunity to do this interview and to answer these questions. And thank you so much for your time. Bye.
Thank you so so much, Allen, for being willing to participate and for contacting me about interviewing and working with me on my author interview project. It means so much to have your thoughts, your opinions, and your writing process shared here on Traditionally Published Tuesdays. If you guys are interested in anything else about him, then be sure to go ahead and check out the description box below where I've listed all of his information as well as my information. If you don't know who I am, my name is Jenna Van Mourik. I am an inspired writer and an inspirational fiction reader who reads, writes, and lives for Jesus. I enjoy writing and reading all things Christian fiction, historical fiction, and especially biblical fiction, which happens to be my favorite subgenre of Christian fiction. I am active here on YouTube weekly. I post author interviews every single week, as well as other fun bookish interviews featuring myself and doing fun bookish tags and reading vlogs and lots of things like that. I also review books as often as I can, and I'm active every single day on social media on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. So make sure you guys go ahead and check out all of those links if you want to keep up with me on a daily basis and learn more about me and what I read, what I write, and what I do with my life. Don't forget to subscribe to this channel so that you never miss a new author interview or a new reading video. Thank you guys again so much for watching and for sticking around all the way through the end of this video. I hope it inspired you, I hope it blessed you, and I hope it helped you either with your writing journey or maybe just finding new books to read and add to your TBR. Thank you guys again so much for watching, and I will see you guys in the next author interview. Bye!